Welcome to the TMRN Time Monk Radio Network. Today is Saturday, the 12th of November, 2011. I'm Gemini, and we are honored to spend an evening with Green Witch Susun Weed, who will be joining us for a discussion of the wise women's way towards natural health, nutrition, medicinal plants, and other very sage topics. Susun has spent 46 years studying, teaching, and sharing her knowledge and wisdom. She is the author of 5 books, including Healing Wise, New Menopausal Years, The Wise Woman Way, Breast Cancer, Breast Health, The Wise Woman Way, Wise Woman Herbal for the Childbearing Year, which is in its 29th printing, and Down There, Sexual and Reproductive Health, The Wise Woman Way. Susun has taught at countless workshops and seminars across the country and has been a guest on numerous radio and television programs, including NPR and NBC News. She is the founder of the Wise Woman Center, Ash Tree Publishing, and the voice of the Wise Woman tradition. Susun is a high priestess of Dianic Wicca, a member of the Sisterhood of the Shields, and a peace elder. I encourage all of our listeners to explore and learn about Susun Weed by visiting her website, www.susunweed.com. Hello, Susun. We are delighted to have you join us this evening.
Green blessings. I'm so glad to be with you.
Thank you. The WebBot Forum administrator and producer of the show is Fox, and he will be doing the recording and technical support of the show. Several members of the forum were kind enough to join us this evening. Please welcome members Green Meadow, Paul D., and Neil. For our listeners, this interview will offer wise woman advice and discussion for those that are interested in our green allies and a natural approach to living and being. Susun has links to books, teaching, upcoming seminars, and decades of knowledge at her website, www.susunweed.com. This interview will be available on YouTube and for free on the WebBot Forum channel and at the website webbotforum.com. Susun, are you ready for the interview?
I am indeed.
And our first question is from Neil.
Hello, Susun. I have a question here from forum member Peace for Gaia. She says, I am interested in what you would recommend as a good starting place to learn about edible wild herbs and plants. Sadly, I think this might become important knowledge in the not-so-distant future.
Well, my first response to that is this is important knowledge right now, because the plants that grow around us constitute what I call people's medicine. I believe that herbal medicine is people's medicine. It's the medicine that truly is our birthright. And I personally do believe that my thoughts are powerful and that what I think I create. And so I am actively involved in thinking about and creating a wonderful future. And certainly plants are part of that wonderful future. There's a couple of places to start. Today, at the Wise Woman Center here near Woodstock, New York, in the Catskill Mountains in the Hudson River Valley, we spent the day working in the gardens. We cut down the nettle, we put the gardens to bed, we raked up the leaves, we moved compost. We did a lot of work in those gardens. And then at the end of the day, we washed our hands and we went out, and here in the middle of November, we harvested wild greens for our salad. We harvested ground ivy. We harvested garlic mustard. We harvested wild oregano. We harvested chives. We harvested wild mince. We got a wonderful amount of wild plants that we could put right in with our store-bought lettuce and had. And we put some lemon balm. Of course, one could say that it's a cultivated plant, but the truth of the matter is I've never planted lemon balm. It just grows around me. So for me, it's a wild plant. And that's where I suggest that people start, is by learning what plants grow around you, picking them, putting them in your salad, and remembering that there's no nutrition of any kind available from raw food. So in order to get the nutrition from our wild plants in our salad, we must add at least 2 tablespoons of oil or half an avocado to each serving of salad.
Thank you for that.
Susun, next up we have Green Meadow.
Hello, Green Meadow.
Hi, Susun. It's good to talk to you. There are some common ailments that seem to come up over and over, and I would prefer to know how to treat them myself versus going to the doctor. How do you treat common problems such as fever, respiratory infection, vomiting, diarrhea? Do you have a good resource on this information that you can recommend?
Well, the first thing that I have to say is that I don't treat problems.
Okay.
And I don't treat problems because problems don't exist.
All right.
People exist, yes?
Yes.
So if we treat vomiting, well, we're treating what? A concept?
Okay.
Because each individual person who's vomiting is vomiting for a different reason. So we could just be the heroes and ride off to war against all problems, or we could be a wise woman and say, is what's going on with this person already healing? So I don't treat problems. I treat people. That said, there are a few herbs which we can talk about in general due to their wonderful effects no matter who the person is.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with the herb slippery elm?
Yeah.
Yes. Ulmus fulva. A beautiful tree till the blight gets it, and they don't get very big anymore, and they like to grow by water. And the inner bark of the slippery elm was one of the first kind of big question marks for me as an herbalist, because I read that in places where slippery elm grew, native people would harvest the inner bark and put it aside in case there was starvation during the winter, in case there was a long, hard snowstorm or a blizzard. They couldn't get out, and their food supplies were running low, and they considered a 6-inch by 2-inch piece of slippery elm bark to be adequate nutrition for an adult human being for up to 40 days in a row.
Wow.
And I wrote to Dr. James Duke, who was then with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and I said, my gosh, what's in slippery elm that it can, sustain life like that? And he wrote back and said, I don't know. And it got him to thinking, too. And so Dr. James Duke now has the world's largest database of the constituents of plants. So if you want to know what's in slippery elm, he can tell you now. And what we can tell you is that slippery elm is a nutritive herb. It's a bland herb, and it's a mucilaginous herb. And what this means is that it's slippery, it's slidey, it's not a stimulant, it's not a sedative, and it's going to build. That really is what distinguishes the wise woman tradition, you know? The scientific tradition measures and fixes. The heroic tradition balances and cleanses, and the wise woman tradition nourishes the wholeness of the unique individual. I prefer to take slippery elm by making it into like a slippery elm pie dough. I just add honey to the slippery elm powder until it's the consistency of pie dough, and then I break off pieces of it about the size of a macadamia nut or a hazelnut and roll them in some slippery elm powder, which is what I've been using, so they don't stick to each other. Store them in one of those tins that you get candy or breath mints in. And anytime I'm feeling a digestive distress coming on, I'm going to just take one of my slippery elm balls and let it slowly dissolve in my mouth. If I feel nauseated or like I'm vomiting, I know that slippery elm will coat and soothe my system and help stop vomiting that isn't necessary, but not interfere with vomiting that is necessary. If I'm constipated, I know that slippery elm will gently increase peristalsis. It coats the intestines and ends leaky gut syndrome. It's really a heaven send for people with Crohn's disease, irritable bowel syndrome, ulcerative colitis, and yet it's mild enough to be used for babies with colic. A real general purpose. Anybody can use slippery elm safely, mixed up with a little honey, and simply dissolved in the mouth.
Well, that's helpful.
So that's one of your difficulties, perhaps, dealt with. And then what was the second one in your list?
Fever.
Once again, fever rises from a great many different things, but in general, what we can say is that fever is how we get well. Without fever, we would simply die. Most bacteria and all viruses that I know of cannot replicate, cannot reproduce themselves at temperatures over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So the primary immune system response to an infection with bacteria or a virus like the common cold or the flu is to turn up the thermostat and burn them out. When we go running in with herbs like white willow bark, an antipyretic, a fever lowerer, what we're actually doing is depressing the immune system and making ourselves more vulnerable to the next cold or flu that comes around.
Okay.
Again, that said, there are situations in which fever can be a threat. In the very old and the very young, fevers of 105, 106 degrees can actually cause convulsions. It's rare for death to actually come about due to convulsions, but you never know. And it's certainly scary for the people around them. So I rely on elderflower tincture, which resets the fever control mechanism in the brain, allowing the body to continue to run a fever high enough to kill bacteria and viruses, but encouraging the body itself to reset and to bring the fever down to a reasonable level. I was reading in a book quite the stirring story of the first person who received penicillin, and they actually had to use all of the penicillin in the entire world for this woman, and she had been running a fever of 104 degrees for 50 days. And she was the first person to be given penicillin, and that penicillin did what her immune system couldn't do, which was to kill those bacteria, which were obviously heat resistant, and to restore her to health. Perhaps elder grows nearby you. Perhaps you've heard about elderberry, which is actually an antiviral, but the elderflower tincture does a different thing, and a different thing than any other herb that affects fever, most of which are diaphoretic. And a diaphoretic is a plant that heats up the body so much that you begin to sweat. And this is actually most dangerous in the very young and the very old, the very people who we would most want to have a treatment for if they're running a high fever.